Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolong Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolong is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, 2 girls go for a bike ride in a small town in Iowa. 5 months later, their bodies are found by hunters who killed the Evansdale girls. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my Bobby Dazzler co-host, Alice.
That is the greatest descriptor. Who gave you that one?
I don't know what that means, but that was Claire. Shout out to Claire. Thank you. Apparently, that's a good thing to be a Bobby Dazzler. So
I just assumed it was a good thing because it sounds so wonderful.
It does sound wonderful. So if somebody writes in and says it means something mean, we're just going to ignore that.
Well, thank you for that descriptor. That just put a smile on my face unexpectedly.
Oh, well, good. Well, that's really the whole point of this podcast, Alice, is to make you happy. So I'm glad we were able to accomplish that tonight.
Well, kind of, Brett. We have a lot to be happy about because I think we just hit 100 downloads of our podcast. 100? 1 million. Look, set the bar real low. Yeah. Sorry, let me redo that. We just hit 1 million downloads of our podcast.
That's right. We did today, as a matter of fact. Even as we are recording this episode, we have hit 1 million downloads, which is totally insane. I don't even know what to say about that. It is unbelievable that is true. We started this podcast less than a year ago, and to have that kind of support from you guys, it's overwhelming.
To put it into perspective, I had no concept of how many listens podcasts would get. And so I asked Brett when we first started what he would be happy with in our first year. And I believe he said 100,000. He would be wildly happy to hit 6 digits. So for you guys to get us to 1 million, listens within our first year is just mind-boggling. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, I mean, I would have been over the moon for 100,000. I think really, I may have said that, but I think I was really thinking if we can get to 10,000, I'll be happy.
I think you originally said 10,000 to be fair.
I think I did. Yeah, I think I said 10,000 because, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we're going to lose all our listeners, but there's so many podcasts out there and people have so many different places they can go. And for people to choose to listen to us ramble on and on about these cases is, like I said, it's amazing. And I'm just glad there's enough crazy people out there to support this podcast so we can keep doing it.
Crazy awesome.
Crazy awesome. So thank you to all of you for all your support. And we look forward to the next million and the next million after that. So that's the happy part of today. We have a sad case. This is another really sad case. This is one of those that I think hits me and hits Alice particularly hard. And I'm sure any of you who have kids out there, it's going to hit you hard too. We're going to be talking a lot about Delphi as we talk about this case because there are so many similarities. And the biggest one of all is you have two young girls with their entire life ahead of them, and they were targeted by a monster and murdered. We're talking about the deaths of two girls from Evansdale, Iowa, Lyric Raylyn Cook Morrissey and Elizabeth Collins. Lyric was 10 years old and Elizabeth was 8. And one thing I want to say before we even start, and I've already said it, we're going to be talking about Delphi a lot. You can't talk about this case without talking about Delphi because people recognize so many connections between these two cases, and it makes people wonder if there's a deeper connection to these two cases. But I really hope that people can look at this case and that we are successful in bringing this case to you on its own terms because these girls deserve justice, and they deserve justice just as much as Abby and Libby do in Delphi. And I think everybody agrees about that, but certainly this case has not garnered the same amount of attention that Delphi has. And I'm not being critical of anybody for that. It's just a fact. And it's a weird thing about true crime. Certain cases grab people, and sometimes cases fall through the cracks.
Absolutely, Brett. You know, as soon as we did Delphi, the response was overwhelmingly positive from our listeners, from you all. And so many of you said, can you please look at the Evansdale murders as well? A lot of you noted that you heard how invested we were in the Delphi episodes, how much it really touched us because we both have kids. And same with these girls who were cruelly murdered. I think you will never, even in our profession, you will never get used to the fact that someone would end the lives of young, innocent children. And that's who these girls are. That's who the Delphi girls are. We talked about that in those episodes. It doesn't matter if they had anything to do with meeting who the perpetrator was. Children should be able to go ride their bikes and not be afraid of being abducted and then murdered. And we will dive more into this, but we hope that you will look at this case in its own right because it is a fascinating case. These girls and their families deserve justice, as do many of these cases. So notice the similarities, but also we're going to dive in on the particular facts of this case as well.
Yeah, and I want to make the same sort of call to action that we made in Delphi. If you were living in Iowa, anywhere in Iowa, frankly, in July of 2012, but particularly if you were in Evansdale or Waterloo, Iowa, I hope you will listen with particular attention to this case, because you may have some piece of information that the police have not received up to this point that could lead to solving this case. So let's dive in this together and see if we can reach some sort of conclusion. We are going back to July 2012, to July 13th, 2012. And on that day, Lyric Cook Morrissey and Elizabeth Collins went for a bike ride in their small town. Now, Evansdale is a town of about 5,000. It is only about 10 miles from the much larger city of Waterloo, Iowa, though Waterloo itself only has about 70,000 people. So we are talking about a relatively rural community, rural area. We want to go through the timeline for you because I think that's the best way to approach this case. This one comes mostly from the Waterloo Courier, so shout out to them for all the good work they have done on this case. This was a Friday, July 13th, 2012. And on that day, the first thing of significance, at about 11:30, witnesses will later describe seeing a large white SUV, possibly a Suburban or a Bronco, near Myers Lake. Now, at least 3 witnesses saw this vehicle parked near the bike trail between two signs on the east side of the lake. This area would become important soon, as you will see. Now, this is that's a pretty definitive car. I mean, you don't see large white Suburbans or Broncos particularly that often. It's interesting to me, Suburban versus Bronco, because the Bronco was recently re-released, but I don't think they made Broncos for a while. So if it was a Bronco, it was an older car, whereas if it was a Suburban, who knows? It could be a newer car. At around the same time, the girls decide to do what kids do all the time, ride their bikes through downtown. At about 12:15, their grandmother actually sees them riding their bike. So they are riding their bikes through downtown Evansdale at around 12:15. At the same time, you have this white Suburban Bronco, whatever it is, near Myers Lake. Before we continue, I want to talk about today's sponsor of the podcast, Daily Harvest. Alice, I feel like things are getting somewhat back to normal and our busy schedules have returned to being busy, but I'm eating better than ever because of Daily Harvest and the delicious food, all built on organic fruits and vegetables they deliver right to my door.
Brett, Daily Harvest is ready when you are. Everything stays fresh in your freezer until you're ready to enjoy it, so you waste less food too. I know this is such a help when I rush in after a long day at court and everyone is hungry and I just have freezer fresh food from Daily Harvest. And I don't have to overthink it. I have meals for my week with Daily Harvest. Smoothies for breakfast, delicious crisp flatbreads for lunch or dinner, and just all types of variety.
As I've said before, I'm a big fan of the broccoli and cheddar bowl, so you guys need to check that out. And you can get started today. Go to dailyharvest.com and enter promo code OWLS to get $25 off your first box. That's promo code OWLS for $25 off your first box at dailyharvest.com. That's dailyharvest.com, promo code OWLS.
If you're looking to streamline your audio advertising buys and maximize your revenue, look no further than Triton Digital's programmatic audio advertising exchange, A2X. The private exchange consists of only licensed broadcasters and top-tier internet radio publishers, assuring the quality inventory and brand safety you can trust. Visit www.tritondigital.com to learn more.
It should be noted that the girls actually had taken off from their grandmother's house. Their mothers were sisters, and they were close in age, and so they were pretty close cousins. And that day, they were both at their grandmother's house, and from there, they decided to go for this bike ride. Now, around 1 o'clock, the girls are seen on Gilbert Drive. This is near Myers Lake, a popular recreational area that we just talked about. Around 2 o'clock, the family starts to grow concerned because the girls have not returned home and no one's heard from them. And the family starts to look for the girls on their own, try to see if they can't locate them. By 2:48, the family realizes something is wrong and they call the police to report the girls missing. To Evansdale Police's credit, they jump right on the case. 2 minutes later at 2:50 p.m., the Evansdale Police search the home, and the home being the grandmother's home, and the area right around her home using 3 squad cars. You're thinking 2 young girls, ages 8 and 10, on bikes. They can't have gotten that far. That's what the police were thinking.
And I just want to say, Alice is 100% right. It seems like the police reacted exactly the way they should in this case. And that's one of the weird things about this case is the police, like we've said so many times these cases begin with sort of the police not doing what they should. And it seems like the police were on top of this. And you'll continue to see that as we walk through the timeline.
And one thing to note, the girls were spotted near Myers Lake, but note that the Evansdale police first go to the grandmother's home where they came from. And now this is not an uncommon move because most missing children are actually right around their home. People think they're missing, but they're actually playing. They're playing in the woods. They're playing in their clubhouse, made up clubhouse, and they're actually very close to home, just no one saw them. And so oftentimes, thankfully, when children are reported missing, they're actually not missing. They're very close to the home, playing, unaware that they have made adults worried due to them being quote unquote missing. So I think it's completely understandable that the police actually go first to the grandmother's house where the girls were originally and where you would expect them to come back from their bike ride. Just about 25 minutes later, the Black Hawk Sheriff's Office sends 4 cars to help. This again, I think, shows police action very quickly. Immediately, Evansdale is reaching out. More help is needed, and they come right away. Fire department also requested to help, and they use a gator to check the bike trails since the girls were last seen on bikes. At 4 p.m., the first discovery is made that relates to the girls, and it's not a great discovery. Firefighters find the girls' bikes abandoned at Myers Lake. Their bikes are near the bike trail on the east side of the lake, but there's no sign of the girls.
And I just want to point out how little time has passed here. Obviously, it's a significant amount of time because the faster the better, but the girls are seen alive and carefree at 1 o'clock. The firefighters are finding their bike at 4. That's only 3 hours. That's very little time that passes between the last sighting we have and the firefighters finding the bike. Remember, in the Delphi case, the girls weren't found until the next day. So this is very quick. This is very fast. And you would think that would bode well for finding the girls, but unfortunately it doesn't. By 4:30, the girls' names are entered into the National Crime Information Center, a nationwide FBI database that includes missing persons, and the fire department immediately begins dragging Myers Lake. Remember, it's July. It's probably warm. The girls are out of school. They're having a good day. They ride their bikes down the lake. It's certainly possible they could have gone for a swim and something went horribly wrong. Now, some people have criticized this a little bit just because there was no real evidence that the girls had gone swimming. Their clothes weren't there. There was no reason to think they were going to go swimming. If something happened to one of them, it's weird that it happened to both of them, though obviously one could be trying to help the other. But I would also say to those who are critical of this, I don't think the police had given up looking for the girls. I think the fire department's probably doing what the fire department does best, which is search this lake.
And also, Brett, I think it makes sense for them to do this because, remember, we're talking about a small town of 5,000 people. Obviously, when you have a situation where there are 2 children missing, first thoughts for any law enforcement is a possible abduction. But they'd like to think that's not the first choice. And if those girls are in that water, the sooner they can get to them, the better. We're talking about a mere few hours. Obviously, drownings can happen in much less time than that. But they're thinking if their bikes are abandoned, there probably has not been a double child abduction in this town in recent memory. Probably, I can't imagine there would be another one. Otherwise, we would have heard of it. And so most likely, those girls went for a swim. It's a hot day. They jumped in. Maybe someone's foot got stuck on a root. And I think that it makes a lot of sense for them to start looking into the lake. Now, I want to say they moved quickly because typically you don't get, draining of a lake that early.
Yeah, and there's a couple things about this that are interesting. Number one, just how quickly everyone is moving, and you're going to continue to see that. I can't even imagine any, bureaucracy, even if it's law enforcement, moving as quickly as they move in this case, and you'll see that as we continue. But Alice is right. I feel like those of us in true crime are sort of conditioned to think there are crimes and horrible crimes happening all the time around us because we focus on them so much, and we tend to magnify the things that we're familiar with. But any child abduction by a non-parent or relative or friend is incredibly rare. It just doesn't happen that often. Stranger abductions, keep teaching your kids about stranger danger, but frankly, stranger abductions are just rare. Double abductions? Oh, man. We're going to talk about another one in this case, and obviously we all know about Delphi, but that is an incredibly rare occurrence. So certainly playing the odds here, it is much more likely that the girls are in some distress in the lake, unfortunately probably already deceased, than that they have been abducted by someone. So this is definitely the right approach. By 5:30, the media has been notified of the disappearance, and divers are already on scene with Cedar Valley Underwater Search and Rescue looking in the lake. Once again, this is amazing how quickly all this moves. I just want to remind you, at 4 o'clock, they find the bikes. An hour and a half later, you already have a team searching the lake. By 6:30, law enforcement has organized a search of the wooded areas around the lake, which continues until about 3:30 a.m. the following day, which is commendable effort on their part. You guys all remember Delphi. They called off that search around midnight. This search continues really late into the day.
And, Brett, that's really interesting that they go through the night. They have a lot working for them, though. It was probably light until quite late. If it's July, you're going to be near your longest day. So probably by 9 o'clock, it's still somewhat light. Right? It's 8:30, it's starting to be dusk, and then you have light till 9. You would think a lot of people call off searches, especially in recreational areas and wooded areas after dark. But here they're going into 3:30, and there's not really a risk of death by exposure in July. It's not going to be too cold. The temperatures probably are not going to be dropping to below freezing. And so the fact that they're searching into the night lets me know that this is personal for the community, for probably a very small, tight-knit community.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And obviously the community has rallied around these girls. Just the similarities with Delphi, and I hate to keep comparing it because I do want to treat this as an independent case, but this case has affected Evansdale in much the same way, where this was a community where these kind of things don't happen. I know everybody says that about every case, but it's really true. And they did come together to try and find these girls, and I think they had to think they were going to find them. By 7 p.m., you have Iowa State Patrol airplane with forward-looking infrared radar has joined the search. So now, like I said, we find the girls' bikes at 4. 3 hours later, you got a plane up in the air with infrared joining the search looking for these girls, and authorities are already interviewing local people who are listed on the state sex offender registry. They're already talking to people who might have been involved in something like this. And by 8 p.m., the FBI has been brought in. NCMEC's involved. The Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation is on the scene. This is not a case where the police said, wait 24 hours and call us back.
No, not at all. Just so you know, NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they are the people who investigate child pornography types of cases, children who are victims of child pornography. So this is very serious, and for them to jump, they're thinking worst case scenario. They're not only thinking abduction, they're thinking potential trafficking of these young girls. Again, shows the seriousness at which they are facing this, and there's none of this hometown turf wars. They've already called Iowa State Police. They've called the FBI. We've talked about in our past episodes how sometimes there are turf wars with jurisdictions when it comes to local, state, or federal law enforcement. But you see none of that here. It seems like the small town is saying, everyone, please help us find our girls and bring them home.
That's 100% right. And NCMEC's an amazing organization. Just another one of the things that John Walsh was involved in supporting after his son was murdered. And they do so much good work, and they did a lot of good work in this case. By 8:30, they're faxing photos and descriptions of the girls to basically everywhere within 100 miles of Evansdale. They got photos up and truck stops and stores, public places, anywhere where these girls might be seen. They are getting the word out. We've got 2 missing girls, and we need to find them. And that's pretty much how July 13th comes to an end.
And what a day, what a frenzied day. This is the type of reaction you want if you go missing. It's very smart of them to go to these high trafficked areas because they're thinking these girls aren't here. We haven't found them yet. So if they're going anywhere, they're probably going by car, by vehicle, and we're going to hit all the places where a car would need to stop. You need to get gas. You probably take a rest if you've been driving for a long time. You're probably going to stop and get food. And so NCMEC and law enforcement are hitting all of these high traffic areas in hopes that someone will notice these two young girls. The next day is Saturday, July 14th at 7 a.m., the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, or DCI, and FBI arrive and begin interviews. They are pounding the pavement as soon as the sun rises here. Civilian searches of the area resume until 7:30 that night, and NCMEC sends out an advisory and prepares posters. No one is slowing down this next day. If anything, it's as if they're infused with even more energy to find these girls. At 8 a.m., law enforcement continues canvassing the neighborhood. Parents' cell phones and computers are taken for examination because of what Brett said earlier. Most child abductions are done by a parent or someone close to the child, someone the child knows. And parents, honestly, are the number one suspects, or you think they may know something about where the children have gone. And that's why the police here moved to examine both of the girls' parents' cell phones and computers. FBI's child abduction response team is deployed, and they remain so until July 20th. So they're on the scene for a week. At 8 a.m., Star One sends cadaver dogs to the lake. So they kind of have two paths of trying to find these girls. They're focused on the lake. They have divers. They're sending cadaver dogs out there, but they also recognize if the girls aren't in the lake, they've probably been taken somewhere, which is why they're sending flyers to all these stores, truck stops, gas stations.
Yeah, and remember, it is unlikely they think the girls would have run away. I mean, one of two things has happened. They've either been kidnapped or they're in that lake. And that has to be what they're thinking. It is interesting, the parents' cell phones and computers, there's a couple different angles they could be taking there. One is that the parents were involved. The other would be that possibly the girls were communicating with somebody on the parents' computers or cell phone. Remember, these are young girls, 10 and 8 years old. We talked about Aisha Degree, who, if I recall correctly, was 9 when she disappeared, and just how rare it is for young girls that age to leave on their own accord. So, you know, they are covering all their bases. They are looking at this from every angle, and they continue to do so. As Alice said, you've got cadaver dogs at the lake. You've got divers at the lake. The patrol plane is back with its infrared radar searching the area, and law enforcement begins to think about the worst, the possibility that these girls have been murdered. They begin searching area dumpsters, which is a common place to dispose of a body. It's a good place to hide a body quickly. And if you get lucky, who knows? Maybe the body will even be moved.
Hey, Brett, that's a really good point that you've made that I want to explore just a little bit further. You know, we talked about how the law enforcement is kind of taking these two paths, the lake or being basically trafficked out of Evansdale. But it seems like police didn't really focus on the fact that the girls may have run away. And I think it's worth talking about it because with Aisha, a lot of people thought maybe she just walked out the door. She did seemingly walk out the door of her own accord, had packed something in a bag and left. And when truckers turned around to try and help her, she ran. So it really seemed like she was the one who chose to leave. But here it doesn't seem like law enforcement spent much time even entertaining the idea that these girls ran away on their own accord. You know, I think it's worth talking about why that is. I think one major point is because they left their bikes behind. If they were running away, these are young girls. They can't drive cars. They can't have access to cars. If someone saw them driving a car, they would immediately think, what is that 8-year-old doing driving a car? So their best mode of transportation has been abandoned. And also, I think the fact that there's been no indication that they are unhappy or there's been any planning among these two girls to leave. Do you have any thoughts on why the police never really considered them to be potential runaways?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, a couple things. They're obviously playing the odds. It's unlikely that these girls would be runaways. As you said, their main mode of transportation has been abandoned. One thing you might consider is they're not runaways so much as I mean, you talked about the parents and how the parents could be involved. The parents are still there, so we don't have any missing parents. As we're going to talk about, the parents in this case, they do have issues, and they were facing some criminal liability in other areas. So you could sort of imagine maybe somebody decides to take the girls and go and leave. But we don't have that here because they're still there. I don't think the FBI, just based on everything you've said and everything we know about kids this age, I don't think they spent a whole lot of time on the possibility that this was anything voluntary. They either ran into some tragic accident around that lake, or there is a third party involved here who has taken them. And as we said, I think part of that is starting to look in dumpsters. I mean, look, we're at 8 p.m. on Saturday. The girls disappeared on Friday. Their bikes were found at 4 p.m. on Friday. It's been more than 24 hours. One thing we know is that if you do not recover a missing child within the first 24 hours, the chances of finding them alive decrease greatly. It's just a fact. Most people who kidnap children don't do it to keep them or to raise them. They do it for their own nefarious purposes, and then typically they either release them or they murder them. And I think at this point, the FBI is thinking that these girls have probably been murdered, though we're going to run into something later that's going to make you question that. But in any event, law enforcement is searching these dumpsters, and they've done something else to ensure that if their search misses anything, it won't be a problem. They've actually asked the companies who deal with this, with the dumpsters who haul garbage, to have dump locations in the landfill that will be set aside for trash deposits. So anything coming from this area, they're going to dump that garbage in a different part of the landfill so that police can go through that and make sure that there are no bodies there.
This is a tight ship, Brett. They really have thought of everything, and they've put it into action quickly. Despite having so many jurisdictions working on the case, law enforcement-wise, they seem to be working very seamlessly, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of red tape or even battling of the egos.
Honestly, it's almost like a drill. It's like what you would expect to see from a drill when you say, we're going to have a simulation of how we want everybody to work together if there's a missing child. And they're just hitting it. You know, I mean, obviously when you have a drill or a simulation, you know it's coming, and so you got everything in place. But they are hitting every note. You know, they're interviewing the local sex offenders. They are dealing with the traffic issue. They're bringing in the radar. They've just got it down, and it's, like I said, it's really impressive, and it's unfortunate. As you know, I mean, they're not going to find the girls, and it's unfortunate that all of this good effort did not result in a better outcome. I wish we weren't talking about this case. I wish we'd never heard of Evansdale because all this came to fruition. But unfortunately, that's not the case. By 7 a.m. on Sunday, July 15th, the law enforcement, they got interviews set up with everybody, the parents. They're doing polygraphs. They're polygraphing everybody they can to try and figure out if anybody had anything to do with this. And the next day, they are draining that lake just to be sure. And like I said, there's been some weird criticism. I find it to be weird. Criticism of the focus on the lake, but I think you had to rule the lake out. And I don't, obviously, based on everything else they're doing, I don't think this distracted law enforcement from all the other possibilities, but they're going to make sure that there's nothing going on there. They're draining that lake, and they're bringing in FBI bloodhounds. So we had bloodhounds already. Now we're bringing in the best. I assume the FBI bloodhounds are, you know, the top of their class or something. I don't know how the FBI selects bloodhounds, but I got to think they're the best bloodhounds, and they're bringing in the FBI bloodhounds to look through this lake.
The next day, July 17th, which is a Tuesday, at 9 a.m., the sewer lines are examined with TV cameras to see if anything's happening down there. I mean, this is just, again, like you were saying, it's like a drill. They're hitting everything, and they seem to have the support of, it's almost like they're like, does anyone have a bloodhound? Bloodhounds come. Does anyone have TV cameras? TV cameras come. And we just mentioned this because this is really not for lack of investigation. By 8 p.m. that night, the FBI bloodhounds are on scene and they are searching the area. So note that the bloodhounds had been requested just 24 hours earlier. These bloodhounds are not local to the area. They're being flown in and they're there and they begin to search the area in hopes of picking up another lead. They haven't found anything since they found those girls' bikes 4 p.m. on Friday. The next day, Wednesday, July 18th at 4 p.m., FBI brings its own dive team, and they have sonar, and they also are confirmed to search Myers Lake. They really are focused to make sure they can rule out Myers Lake. Again, even if they don't find a body, they might be able to find a weapon. They might be able to find some clue that had been discarded by a perpetrator to locate these girls. At this point, I think they are hoping for anything within Myers Lake. The next day, Thursday, July 19th, at 5 p.m., the Myers Lake draining ceases. And on Friday, July 20th, at 7 a.m., the FBI dive team examines Myers Lake. At noon, they set up vehicle checkpoints to start checking cars coming in and out of this area.
Yeah, by this point, they've drained the lake, they've searched the lake, they're not in the lake. And so as unusual and rare and unlikely as it might be that these girls were kidnapped, that's really the only option left. They've been taken by somebody. And this investigation is going to go forward from this point with the assumption that we are dealing here with a kidnapping and unfortunately possibly a murder, and that turns out to be the case. December 5th, 2012, so 5 months later, the girls' bodies are found by hunters at the Seven Bridges Wildlife Park near Redland in Bremer County. Now, this is a wildlife area approximately 25 miles from where the girls were last seen.
Brett, they didn't get there by themselves because we know they abandoned their bikes. It's possible to bike 25 miles, but they didn't do it because their bikes were left behind. And like we stated earlier, they couldn't drive. They were 10 and 8. They didn't drive themselves there, which this is kind of where we were with Aisha Degree when her backpack was found so many miles north of her home. The only way she could have gotten there, the only way these girls could have gotten here was by someone else driving them.
And this area, and we're going to talk about this a lot, this area is incredibly isolated. This is a nature area, and depending on where you're from, if you live in New York City, a nature area is like Central Park, right? If you live out in the middle of nowhere, you're going to understand what this is. This is like overgrown, not well-traveled, no paths, and the area where these girls are found is a blessing that their bodies were found. It's almost a miracle that their bodies were found. You essentially had to have these hunters walk right up to them to find them. If they had walked 3 feet to the right or 3 feet to the left, they wouldn't have seen these girls. That's how dense this area is. So whoever did this, and like Alice said, there's no question. They didn't walk there. They obviously didn't ride their bikes there. They did not end up there any way other than being brought there. But whoever brought them there with the intention that they wouldn't be found, or at least it would take a long time to find them. And they were successful to a certain extent. Probably 5 months was less than they thought. They probably thought these girls might never be found. What exactly was found there with the girls is hard to say. We're going to be talking about the similarities between this case and Delphi a lot, as I've said earlier. In the same way that the folks in Delphi have been very tight-lipped, the police in Evansdale have also been tight-lipped, and they have not talked about what physical evidence, if any, they found on the scene.
But Brett, like so many of our missing person cases that we've already covered, we've noted how dense the area is and that the person's probably in there. We've said this about Brandon Lawson. We've said this about Maura Murray even, that if they are out in kind of the density of the brush, they may be somewhere very close by, but you need to stumble upon them to find them. I frankly can't believe that these hunters found them, and they must have been just as shocked when they stumbled upon them.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, can you imagine? I've often thought about that, actually, how that must haunt you to find a body like that. I mean, how it must just, I can't even imagine. I don't know. It'd be hard for me to ever go back out into the woods again if I had stumbled upon something like that, particularly in a case like this. I mean, these are children.
Absolutely, Brett. And I think this is also important to dwell on for purposes of understanding this case. Like you said, there are no trails back here. These hunters were on foot. They would have, if they were in a car, I don't think they would have found these girls. They were on foot hunting. And when you hunt, you are walking through wherever terrain you are quietly so as not to scare away your game. And so it means that these girls were not in a car when they ended up in this location. There was probably some walking involved, which we'll get to our next point, but it's hard to carry two girls. It's hard to carry two people at all into the wild. And so likely their own 2 feet got them to where they were. And then whatever happened there happened.
I think that's a great point. It's and the reason it's so important to think about this kind of stuff, it's not out of some, weird, morbid curiosity or anything like that. It speaks to the person and what they're doing. It takes a certain kind of person, number one, to kidnap 2 girls. Number 2, to drive those 2 girls anywhere, much less 25 miles. I mean, just think about that. Having 2 people in your car, 2 girls in your vehicle as you're driving, literally anyone you pass could notice something weird about that and call the police or notice an unusual circumstance. The fact that you're willing to do that says something about you. And I think Alice is probably right. Given this area, it's possible, I guess, that this person drove out to this location, parked their car, and then carried a body out into the wilderness, dropped it off, went back to the car, got another body, carried it out to this area, and dropped it off. But man, that is so dangerous. That is so incredibly dangerous to do that as the perpetrator. You are exposing yourself for so long when you do that. And that makes me think Alice is probably right. The girls probably were alive when they went out to that location.
And, let's talk about some of the unusual aspects of this case. We've reached the end of our timeline, and there is a lot of detail in that because of the thoroughness and quickness with which law enforcement responded. But I'm not the only one who believes that the girls were alive when they left Evansdale. The FBI also believe that the girls were alive at least an entire week after they disappeared. This is from ABC News. Quote, "We believe the 2 girls are alive." That was the FBI spokeswoman, Sandy Brault, who told ABC News this. And this was obviously soon after their disappearance when there was still a lot of law enforcement activity to look for these girls. Now, Brault said that this belief was based partly on the evidence found that Friday. Remember the bikes that were abandoned? But she would not elaborate further. So we don't know what her statement is based on. But by the way, it takes a lot for law enforcement to say something like that. We believe the 2 girls are alive, because that affects how people look for these girls. It makes all of these people who are getting the flyers, who are getting the Nick pings, to look for 2 alive girls as opposed to 2 bodies that are covered in the bed of a truck, for example. And so I don't think she's just saying that. I think she has some reason to believe that to be true, because this can help activate all of these witnesses around to be looking for these two girls. Now, all we know, of course, is that the two bikes were abandoned. I think it's a pretty good guess that the girls were alive when they were taken from their bikes. And I do think they were taken from their bikes because even though Evansdale is a small town, this is a recreational area. Myers Lake is still a place where people go to walk or run. In fact, we know that at least 3 witnesses saw a van parked there in the span of about 45 minutes to an hour. So this is not completely abandoned. This is not the middle of nowhere. There are witnesses. And to take 2 people at one time takes time. And likely you would have found some indication that the girls were hurt or murdered on the spot. You would see blood, you would see gunshot casings, you'd see a knife, you'd see something if the girls had been injured where their bikes were. And I'm just guessing.
That's a really good point.
I'm just guessing, but I'm thinking that the FBI didn't find any indication of DNA, or maybe they didn't even see a struggle. And that leads them to believe if there's no struggle, the girls are okay physically when they got taken from the bikes.
And that's a really good point. And I think if there are people who are wondering, how could they know that? It's what Alice just said. And we've said this so many times. Crimes are messy. Murders are messy. It's hard to kill somebody, and it usually leaves a lot of evidence. And these are 2 girls. This person did not kill them at the lake and then move their bodies. Number one, that wouldn't make any sense, because why would they do that? If this was a stranger murder, they would just murder them there and then leave the bodies. Once again, much like in Delphi.
And Brett, just as we're talking here, this makes a lot more sense to me why they put so many resources into searching the lake. If they didn't see any struggle on the bike, it may be because the closest kind of weapon that a perpetrator would have would be the lake, right? There wouldn't be much of a sign of a struggle, and you wouldn't need a weapon if you were to throw the girls into the lake. So maybe that's why they focus so much. Maybe there is some kind of method to the madness of why they focus so much energy on the lake, other than the fact that the bikes were close to the lake.
Yeah, no, that makes sense too. And that would explain, like I said, some of the criticism's been, well, there was no evidence they went for a swim. They didn't leave their clothes behind. But if they were drowned, if the person who murdered them drowned them and then, tied a rock to the body and sunk it, you wouldn't expect to find their clothes neatly folded somewhere. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think the fact that you got the lake, by this point, when this lady is making this statement, the lake has been cleared, essentially. They're not in the lake. There's no evidence that they were murdered. There's no blood. There's no gun casings. As you said, there's just no evidence of a struggle. Then there's at least some reason to think the girls are alive. Now, I think this is a pretty bold statement. And I don't feel like the FBI would make this statement just willy-nilly. To say we believe the 2 girls are alive, and to say that's based on evidence, and to say that a good week later, I feel like there's something else there that we don't know about. And I'm not sure exactly what it is. And maybe there's not, but that's an intriguing statement to me.
That's a great point, Brett. They're not making this statement on Friday after they find the bikes, right? They're saying this a week later. So usually, as you've mentioned, if someone's not recovered, a missing person isn't recovered in the first 24 hours, the probability of finding them decreases dramatically. And oftentimes that's because the more time a perpetrator has, the more time they have to carry out something like a murder. And so I wonder what additional evidence they have to go on. And another reason the FBI and all law enforcement don't say something like that so flippantly is because it gives hope to the family that the girls are in fact alive. And that's what happened here. Heather Collins, Elizabeth's mother, said, "That's amazing. This is the best news we have heard all week. Keep praying we will have them back." Law enforcement is not just cold and heartless. They recognize that they are dealing with families. They know that these families are just living a hell when they are looking for their children who are missing.
And unfortunately, as we know, as hopeful as this statement was, it turned out not to be accurate. Those bodies were found in that isolated area we're going to talk about a lot more, the Seven Bridges Wildlife Park. We're going to talk about this case more next week. We'll wrap up next week, but I do want to leave you with this Seven Bridges Wildlife Park, because the park is kind of, and I hate to keep coming back to this, but it's a lot like the Monon High Bridge in Delphi. It is a place that is isolated. It is a place that most people would not know. And even if they knew about it, they would not know it intimately. They would not have the kind of familiarity with it that one requires to dump a body. And that may sound strange to you, but murderers, killers, typically, they hunt in their own areas they know. They dump bodies in areas they know. Typically, they don't just say, well, that spot looks isolated enough, I'm going to drop a body off there. Typically, they know these areas. They've been there before. So, if you are someone who has been to Seven Bridges Wildlife Park, if you know it, if you frequent it, if it was the kind of place you went in 2012, you may have seen this person before, not even realized it. But you should think about, did you see anyone in that area who struck you as unusual, who bothered you, who gave you the creeps? Is there anyone you know who liked to go hunting there? Maybe they liked to go hunting there before 2012 and then they never went again, that kind of thing. Think about that, because the location matters so much for this case. It really does. It's not just a place you put a body. It's a place they picked. The murderer picked this place, more so than the lake. The girls picked the lake. The girls went to the lake. The murderer picked the dump spot. So focus on that. Think about that. Think about if you know this area. Like I said, we're going to talk about this some more next week. We're going to continue to go through this case. We're going to talk about Lyric's parents and some of the unusual things about them. We're going to talk about some suspects in this case and whether or not they fit the bill for someone who might have done this. We're going to talk about the FBI's behavioral analysis, which they have released in this case, and which is interesting both for this case and for Delphi, because you probably have a similar type of person involved in this case and that case. And we are going to talk about the similarities between Evansdale and Delphi, and we're also going to talk about the differences and whether or not we think these cases might be connected. Shoot us an email if you have any thoughts on this case, if you have any questions, anything you want us to cover. prosecutorspod@gmail.com is our email address. @prosecutorspod for all our social media. You can find us everywhere. I want to remind everybody we are going to be at the end of the month in Austin for CrimeCon. We want to see you there. We want to meet all of you who keep asking what we look like. You can meet us in person and see for yourself. Prosecutors, use that at checkout. You'll get 10% off. It's totally worth it. Look for us on Reddit. Look for us on YouTube. Join our Patreon. And if those of you who have not already picked up a onesie from our store, do that. All proceeds go to the Cold Case Research Institute. I want to give a shout out to Hannah Hill, who continues to do all the great artwork for our show. Go visit her at Serious Moonlight on Instagram. Well, Alice, before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with?
This is just a haunting case, a devastating case, but, we hope we can shed some light on it. And we do think that this is a case that can be solved, and it can be solved with people like you who are listening, and especially if you lived around this area. So come back next time for lots more discussion about this case.
And I really want to emphasize this. There's so much opportunity here. Delphi gets so much attention. It's got its own podcast. It's got its own television show. It's got a lot of focus. This case, not so much. So you really may have the key here. You may have the tip that could change everything. So I hope everybody is listening carefully and really racking their minds if you guys were in that area at the time. We're going to talk about more of this case next week. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Murray stuff. It's just so ridiculous.
I'll have to hear about it
Warren
after.
Murray. I keep getting distracted by like things that are happening on Warren Murray, but whew, man, okay. Anyway. Though I gotta say, Delphi is just as crazy. It's crazier in like a low level way.
Right.
It's not as like in your face, but man, the stuff that goes on Facebook and Reddit and Delphi is just out of this world insane. It's just I can barely wrap my head around it. I don't know. I guess there are always crazy people. Like I was reading, somebody was trying to say that Chris Watts was innocent and that his wife killed the kids, and then
He killed her in anger or something?
and then he killed her in anger. Yeah, and it's like, why did he admit to killing them all then? That doesn't even make sense, you know?